It was a peaceful and quiet night. Everyone in the house was deep asleep, and so was Nina, enjoying the last sweet hours of sleep towards dawn. Nina was a 15-year-old girl who lived in Wahoo, Nebraska, with her mother and her father. She had an elder sister who recently moved away for college to California. Nina now had the room all to herself. At around 6 in the morning, she woke up feeling unusually cold. She tossed under her blankets, cuddling into it. Nina started to get goosebumps from the chilly weather in the room. Her slumber was disrupted a little earlier than she'd like. She usually got up at 7 in the morning. Nina tried to close her eyes and rested out for the next hour. Suddenly, she got an uncomfortable feeling like someone was watching her. Startled, she sat up in her bed. She was horrified to see a dark figure a distance away from her in the room. It was a woman. Her hair was a mess, tangled around her face, cut unproportionately. Nina looked at the woman standing there. The woman raised her head. Nina gasped in fear as the woman stared at her with petrifying yellow eyes. The woman started to approach her. Nina noticed she wasn't walking towards her, rather whatever it was hovered above the ground. Nina cowered on her bed, clutching her blankets as the figure approached closer to her. She wanted to scream for help, but not a sound left her trembling lips. As soon as Nina felt a tug on her blanket, she scrambled off of her bed and ran to her door. She was too afraid to look back, but she could see through the corner of her eyes the woman was still watching her, following her. Nina ran out the hallway and banged on her mother's door. Her father had already left for work. Her mother was probably awake. When her mother didn't respond, Nina barged inside and shook her mother awake. Her mother was frightened seeing Nina's horrified expression. Nina stuttered as she told her mother what she saw in her room. Her mother was strangely quiet. She had a nervous look on her face. Nina watched her mother peering over her shoulder. She was looking at the door. Frantically, she asked her, "Mom, why are you quiet?" Her mother still looked at the door. Nina gulped and turned around. She screamed out in fear when she saw the woman hovering by the doorway. Nina ran behind her mother, pointing at the woman at the door. Mom, what? It's right there." Nina's mother walked towards the door. She loudly and sternly spoke to whatever was lurking there. But Nina couldn't understand the language her mother was speaking. Nina watched as the figure suddenly vanished into the hallway. Still shaking, she looked at her mother. Her mother turned and held her by the shoulder. "Go, get freshened up. I'll make breakfast." Nina watched her mother grab her gown and walk out into the hallway. She didn't explain anything to her. Nina herself didn't know what to ask her. That morning, Nina had her breakfast, packed her things, and left for school. Her day went by as usual, but Nina couldn't forget what happened early that morning. She wanted to talk to her mother about it, but something about her mother's behavior made her a little uncomfortable to bring up the topic. That night at the dining table, Nina and her mother were quiet. Her father was the only one rambling on about his day. The family had a quiet dinner before they all went to bed. It was around 10 when Nina was trying to fall asleep, still pondering about the previous day. Nina noticed her door creak open. Her mother stepped inside. She came and sat on Nina's bed. Nina watched her mother take off a necklace she wore. Her mother held the pointed locket tightly in her hands and looked at it before placing it in Nina's hand. She said, "From now on, keep this with you at all times. I hoped that you wouldn't have to face what I did. I was relieved when it didn't happen to your sister. But now that it has begun, there is nothing that can protect you from it, except this. Mom, who or what was that? What did you say to it? It's better if you stay out of this. Knowledge of some things only corrupt the mind. With that, Nina's mother took the locket from her hand and put it on Nina. She stroked her hair before she turned off the light and left the room. Nina was relieved to see her mother's loving eyes. She slept peacefully that night, and every night that followed after that. Until one night, about 3 years later, around the time when Nina was 17 years old, she experienced something that she would never forget. Nina was in bed, trying to fall asleep, and soon she did. It was suddenly in the middle of the night that she heard her door creak open. She ignored it at first and shifted to the other side. That's when she felt a chilling breeze enter through her door. She opened her eyes and looked at someone standing at her doorway. Nina rubbed her eyes and sat up, focusing on the figure as her eyes adjusted to the darkness. Mom, Dad, is that you? Something wasn't right. It was unusually quiet. Nina remembered that awful night years ago. Her heartbeat raised as she stared at whatever it was standing at her door directly in front of her. Nina could now see what it truly was, a demon, staring at her with its wicked eyes, hunched over, its hands long and bony, its nails curled and pointed. It wasn't any person. It wasn't a human. It was a demon, a vile creature, the wickedest of souls and the most horrendous to the eye. Nina could see it panting restlessly, its heart pounding in its chest. She tightly grasped onto her locket and closed her eyes, wishing that it would just disappear. When Nina opened her eyes moments later, she looked at her doorway empty. No one was in her room. No one was in the hallway. Nina let out a breath in relief. She covered herself in her blankets and tried to pass the night holding tightly to her locket. She would never let this out of her sight. But Nina had trouble sleeping. The next morning, she caught hold of her mother. She demanded to know what was happening to her. What was her mother keeping from her? Mom, tell me. I can't take this anymore. You saw a demonic spirit. My father always kept me away from her, away from my mother. I grew up without her, and perhaps that was for the best. My parents belonged to the same Native American tribe. My father married my mother when they were just teenagers. He wasn't aware that my mother was involved in otherworldly affairs. She spoke to the dead and performed secret rituals and sacrifices to them. It was after the marriage, a few years after I was born, that my mother started to behave strange. She stopped sleeping. She stayed crouched in the corner of her room. She tried to attack anyone who went near her. Things only seemed to be getting worse. Soon after, she was seen eating raw meat. She cut portions of her hair and ripped out others. Her body language changed. It was like she transformed into an animal. She walked on all four and growled. She even tried biting my father. Her condition only worsened day by day. That was when my father sent me away to my grandparents. He stayed with my mother, trying to cure her. The doctors could offer no help, and my father knew this wasn't a sickness my mother had acquired from anything earthly. He called a shaman from his tribe, a native spiritual healer. The shaman blessed the house and sanctified it with sacred herbs and elements. My mother went rogue at that point. She had to be bound to a chair with ropes. The shaman tried speaking to her, but my mother would not respond. It was when he addressed an evil spirit that she tried to take his life. My mother had become possessed, perhaps by an evil entity that she had summoned herself in her rituals and traditions against the teachings of the tribe. The shaman couldn't save her, and she was banished from the tribe. My father was told to divorce her. He was reluctant at first, but he knew the entity had taken control of my mother. He couldn't save her. Nothing could. My mother passed away in that state. Whatever had possessed her took her with it. After her death, I started to experience horrible nightmares of my mother calling me to her. She wanted to take me where she had gone. I started to see a demonic creature following me. My father's only worry turned to protecting me. He went back to the shaman requesting for a way to keep me safe. That was when the shaman blessed this locket. This has kept me safe, out of reach of all evil for as long as I was weak. As I grew up, I spent much of my time researching the practices my mother used to follow. I learned of ways to combat that evil. I learned the language of the spirits. I've become strong enough to overpower such a force, and this locket has become a source of solace for me, a reminder of my father's love. I don't require this anymore, but you do. Don't worry about me. This is what will protect you from now on. Nina looked at her locket. It was true that no harm could come upon her as long as she kept the locket with her. Nina often saw many things over the years, but never could any evil reach her. But what about her mother? Nina often worried about her. She knew her mother couldn't always win the battle. Perhaps on many nights she did, but on some dark nights, when her mother came to check on her, Nina knew it wasn't her mother who was staring at her from the doorway. Click on the subscribe button and check out more awesome videos on our channel. And don't forget to press the bell icon because you know it's interesting.